all of that time. There we go.
Sorry, David.
That's okay. Yeah, we've been here for 25 years, primarily in oil and gas. I've provided solutions in oil field through chemistry, and currently work in water protection of our freshwater resources, and assisting companies in innovative ideas to utilize waste streams, all regarding water. I currently work for ChampionX. Our party stands for freedom and inclusivity for everyone. And I believe that our debt is becoming insurmountable. That's a primary concern. Fiscal responsibility. We need some people in government with some business acumen, which I think I bring to the table, and do a good job right now with our companies. And I can transfer that into government in terms of policy. We need trust and integrity in our government right now. We have no transparency, which is something that the current administration ran on, and has just absolutely failed to do so. And this election is a primary example of that. We're having an unnecessary election to bury scandal. We're currently taking the House Speaker to court. We've had a Minister of Finance that has refused to testify in front of committee. These things are not acceptable. We need to hold the government accountable and demand some transparency. We stand for repealing the existing legislation around the equalization formula, Bill C-48, the tanker ban, Bill C-69, the No Pipelines Act, and we are most strongly against the carbon tax, carbon levy, whatever you want to call it. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion and the questions from you all.
Sorry, I had to mute. I apologize there. We had forgot to start recording. So we will give a few extra minutes at the end for Ryan and Phil because their opening statements were missed in the recording. So we'll make sure that you get some extra time in there. And I see that Amir just joined us as well. Welcome. So we will keep going and move on to Catherine.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. And I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people in Fort Nelson and the Lheidli here in Prince George, where I am today. As a single parent of 6 children, I see the future for my children in their eyes does not look promising in regards to the climate changing effects upon the environment that sustains us all. The Canadian government is not willing to take any of the necessary steps to acknowledge this immediate crisis. It is business as usual. There's no time left to waste on empty political promises. Resource extraction methods and industrial activities exacerbate this issue. I am offering my time, integrity, and commitment on behalf of the Green Party of Canada to bring forth tangible solutions that address climate change impacts now and not later. My background is in community development. I've been offering community development to the community of the Prince George and vulnerable sector for the last 20 years. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization serving vulnerable First Nations children, youth, and families. I did a 2-year contract with Aboriginal youth focusing on gang prevention. That was my opportunity to have deep discussions with individuals that are incarcerated and how it is that we can create change, and recognize, even though in my final report after 2 years and pages upon pages about how these people understand what change could look like for their children so that they don't end up being incarcerated, never move forward. I've worked in environmental health. I worked in the Blueberry River community doing an actual health study with Health Canada, where each community member was assessed for their health and well-being after the sour gas well leaks. Afterwards, their community was moved well over 1 kilometer, but still within the shadow of sour gas wells and venting. This was also the same situation where much data was collected, but no clear direction as to how we can create changes for people that are being impacted by such vast health impacts. I now work in the community doing mental health work, and this sector is rising rapidly. We have eco-anxiety for children and youth. We have individuals now battling each other over being vaxxers or anti-vaxxers. This is becoming a human rights debate. This is becoming a beyond political debate. This is about individuals that are feeling that they're losing their own choice in how they move forward in their life. And it's due to how we politic in this country. We have voter apathy. We have definitely less people attending some of these forums that we've seen so far, unfortunately, due to COVID, due to protests, due to fear, due to apathy alone, that there's little trust. We watch events last night where we can actually see our federal leaders having a debate, but publicly bickering amongst each other. There's no collaboration. There needs to be an opportunity to move forward. And I believe the Green Party offers that. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. So we will move on to Bob, and Amir will give you an opportunity after Bob.
Thanks, Bev, and thank you for hosting us, Fort Nelson. When I think of all the times I've been up to Fort Nelson, all the friends that I've gained over the number of years being the member of Parliament, the one thing that just is outstanding to me is the huge potential. We talk about the environment and what we can do for climate change, and we have it right in Fort Nelson. We need to get clean LNG around the world and reduce emissions by up to 50% in some cases. And it's been unrealized. Sadly, we have a prime minister that doesn't realize that potential, and we need to see a change there. I just wanted to thank you again for the opportunity to come here today. As your former member of Parliament, now candidate for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, I care about our country. Ever since I started, I've wanted to make a difference locally and nationally, and I have. It's been a lot of work and a lot of miles, but it's been well worth it. We need to get our country back on track, and we have a plan, and a hopeful plan, to do exactly that under Aaron O'Toole and our Conservative Party. Thanks for attending, and I look forward to your questions.
Wow, I haven't even had to be timing at all. So thanks, Bob. Amir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bev. So, and also thank you guys for attending. Initially, I had some technical issues with the internet, so please accept my apology there. Let's just recognize that we are in the unceded territory of Fort Nelson First Nation, and a little bit about myself. I'm the Liberal candidate in this riding, and the reason that I'm running in this federal election is that I see that our country's political issues are becoming a culture war, very close to what we're experiencing in the south of our borders in the United States. Yesterday, I was in the Mackenzie debate with the rest of the candidates, and at the end of the debate, I had the opportunity to speak with a veteran. And our debate was about like an hour and a half or so. And my conversation with that great veteran was about an hour as well. I realized that although there are so many differences in, in our political flags and our, if you just remove those political hats, we're going to see so much of mutual understanding of what the situation could be heading if we're not fixing that culture war. I am pro-vaccine. I am someone who wants my country to go back to the normal economy. I want to make sure that as many as people through soft mandates that are out there will get their vaccines done. And I will be talking about food security. I will be talking about the oil and gas sector. And I want to provide alternatives to just empty talks that we're going to support this, we're going to support that. I want to actually bring concrete changes that can affect people's lives and, you know, the growing number of unemployment. Looking forward to speaking about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to open the floor up to questions, and I have had a few questions as well that have come into me by email, so I will throw those into the chat as I have an opportunity. Oh, sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, you had just mentioned that you'd give Phil and I an opportunity to be
yes.
recorded on our introduction.
Yes, go ahead. We can do that at the beginning.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Ryan Dick. I'm the PPC candidate for this region. I grew up in Fort St. John, and I've traveled abroad in this region and hunted abroad in this region. I took this opportunity because of my deep concern for these, especially for our community. You see that we are being shamed by the government for our low vaccination rates, and there are many businesses that believe that it is improper to enforce vaccine passports on the population. And it's deeply concerning to me, the polarizing ways that the government has tried to manage the COVID crisis. I believe we need to address the issue of natural immunity, because like other viruses, if you have natural immunity, you should not get the vaccine. But for some reason, we're not going to discuss natural immunity or the issues. We have Teresa Tam with her infinite wisdom telling us that vitamin D helping your immune system is fake news, which has been in medical journals for hundreds of years. So there's a lot of reason for distrust of the way the government has handled it, and pushing people harder is only going to create more civil unrest. And I appreciate, Catherine, your mention of reconciliation. That is definitely at the heart of why I'm in this. And that's been a large part of my campaigning, has been seeking to bring reconciliation, speaking with business owners who are trying to process this, speaking with people who are being told they'll lose their job if they don't give in to the vaccine passport, which is still in the test trials. And I had a meeting in the park. I mentioned it at another one of these candidate meetings that had a meeting in the park in Prince George, and we had people from every side of this issue, people that used to vote Green Party or maybe have voted Green Party in the past, we'll leave it at that, people that have voted Liberal, people who voted Conservative, people who voted into NDP, even an NDP campaign manager anyways. And we had a big discussion around this issue, and it was interesting to see how with wisdom and grace you can bring a divided community and bring it back to a mutual understanding of people have the right to choose. People make decisions based on different information than what you have, and we need to respect each other and move forward in an unsegregated society. And I believe the People's Party of Canada is the only party that's going to put their foot down on the vaccine passports, which is a massively polarizing issue in our nation.
Thanks, Ryan. Dave, did you want to go ahead? And I'm so sorry that you guys are having to do this twice.
Phil.
Oh, sorry, Phil.
Hello, my name is Phil Hewkin. I have lived in north central British Columbia for 40 years. Smithers, Chetwynd, Fort St. John, and now Prince George for 36 years. I was stay-at-home dad to my 3 sons. I have been married for 38 years to the same woman. I have 5 wonderful grandchildren. Do you feel like government treats you like a child? Do you feel like your vote does not matter at voting time? I would like to present to you that I am a voting option. I am your Prince George Peace River Northern Rockies CFF direct democracy candidate. It is obvious to me that we need change. Direct democracy means that regardless of political stripe, every voter gets to have their say on every issue that affects their life. Whether that issue be gun control, carbon tax, vaccine passports, how government handles CPP monies, you would have a vote that would count on everything, including recalling me, your MP, if I'm not getting the job done for you. I am not really a politician. I am a guy who is sick of being treated by a child by government. Any politician that supports the carbon tax is posturing on climate change and environmental issues. It is a fraud, and I can easily prove it's a fraud. It's a tax grab. The only thing they care about extracting that is green is your money from your wallet as a Canadian. If giving money to politicians was a solution to environmental issues or climate change, how did we wind up with these problems in the first place? Because all my life, I've been forking over massive amounts of cash to the government. So with direct democracy, you would have a vote on everything that affects your life. The option to post the question on what could be voted on would also be an option. You would be in the driver's seat for the future for your children and your grandchildren. This could reboot democracy in Canada. I firmly believe this is a strategy that should be employed, and it's democracy at its purest form. My mother-in-law passed away in a care home in Dawson Creek in June of COVID. 2 months previous, the family was contacted to get permission to give my ailing grandmother, or mother-in-law, sorry, who had dementia, COVID shots. She had 2. When they called us, 2 months later, they said, your mom has COVID and she's not going to make it. They called us later the next day to say she had passed. 2 of my in-laws, my wife's siblings, had both their injections. They were not permitted to be with their mother at her deathbed. Now they had received both injections. If they had actually received a vaccine, why were they required to quarantine at home for 2 weeks instead of being at their mother's deathbed? Why weren't they allowed to be there with her? My mother-in-law, a benchmark human being, died alone, or excuse me, amongst strangers, because she had a disease that she should have been protected from. And the people closest to her were not allowed to be with her. Now, this is horrible. And I've asked questions about this, and I've been scorned. I've been called names. I've been called an anti-vaxxer. And I submit to you, every single Canadian in my riding, you will get to vote on this. And if the majority says no to vaccine passports, no to pushing vaccines like a unwashed drug dealer in the high school parking lot, then this will count and this will come to an end. It is up to you. It is not up to me. My politics are irrelevant. As your MP, I will represent you in Ottawa, and I will not be silenced.
On that note, Phil, your 3 minutes are up. Thanks very much. So we're going to move into questions now. And I see one here. And we've this is actually kind of a good intro because you guys have basically all started talking about this anyway. What is your stance on the vaccine passport? How do you feel it should be implemented, if at all? Do you think the government should be providing more support to small business with the implementation? And how do you see that looking? And I'm going to ask everybody to limit their answers to 2 minutes. And Amir, we'll start with you.
So about the vaccine passport, this has 2 sides. Number one is is Canada with respect to the international world, and also domestically speaking, with like people going to restaurants and movie theaters and stuff. In terms of the international, that's a decision that is going on as a way to make sure that we have other industries like tourism and hospitality actually being boosted up. So we need to have a way so we can bring more travelers that are vaccinated. In terms of domestic issues, I believe that at some point we need to bring our economy back to where it was. And the safest way is to make sure that some level of, I would call them soft mandatory measures would be in place. Like if you want to go to a restaurant, you should provide a proof of vaccination. In terms of supporting small businesses, I'm all for that. Specifically talking about UBI as a way that we can make sure that people are supported in terms of their minimum needs. And then how that will help them is that it reduces the tension for them to actually go and open up their own business and make sure that they're doing the job that they like, not they're forced to do something that they don't like about it. We have this bill C-273 passed the first reading, sponsored by a Liberal candidate in Toronto right now, a colleague of Bob at this point, and it's on the second reading. And support is there across the board. We have NDP people voting for it. We have a former conservative senator and chief of staff of the conservative prime minister, Brian Mulroney, as a supporter of this as well. So I'm for that. I believe that that would be the best way so we can support our people and our small businesses as well. More support in terms of the Liberal platform. You can definitely check our website and our COSA platform as well.
Have to unmute. Ryan, we'll go to you next.
I'm having some technical difficulties at the moment with power at my house because I'm on solar. Can I have 2 seconds? Can I be maybe
You bet.
on the line?
Phil?
Hello. I think they're very good questions that are being asked, and I thank the askers for them. And I have a very comprehensive solution to worker shortages, as well as, addressing the homelessness and opioid problem. And what I'm about to say next is a shout out to anyone who is living in the streets in any town across Canada. If you're out there hurting and in pain and struggling, living in abject misery in your addiction, you have a choice. There are ample resources available to you. Many people have left a life of active addiction and self-destruction and gone on to become healthy, productive members of society.
Phil, can I just
Anyone could do this. And so my shout out is, please reach out for help, get the help. And what I'm telling you is that our streets are a standing army of potential future employees if they can come off the streets, clean up their lives, become healthy, and fill these workplace requirements.
Okay.
Because I firmly believe that, may I speak?
Sorry, Phil, I was just interrupting you because the question that we're currently on is, what is your stance on the vaccine passport? Do you feel it should be implemented? Do you think government should be providing more support to small business?
Okay,
and how do you see that looking?
Question. Yeah, okay. I thought I already addressed that. I personally am completely against that. It is reminiscent of being asked for your papers in World War II. That's my personal view. I believe that the Canadian way is to not do that and to simply inform people and allow them to make an informed decision based upon their own consent after being informed. And this is something that with direct democracy, every Canadian would have the right to vote on, whether it be masking, whether it be vaccine passport mandates, all these things, every Canadian would have a vote on what affects their lives. And if they say, no, we do not want this to happen, then government has to respect that. Bottom up instead of top down. Government has stood by silently while many people have lost their businesses and lost their homes. And these people have something to say, you know, and it isn't very nice, Bob, I have nothing against you, but many people have had the government come for their jobs by deciding who is necessary to keep working and who is not, who is essential and who is not. And big government has been silent. So Bob, you know that I'm coming for your job. How does it feel? You know, and I would ask any MP this, who has been silent throughout this. No one has been vocal enough about this because they're so afraid of the media. Well, I'm telling you, Canadians deserve the right to vote on these issues, and no means no, whether it's rape or vaccine passports. And I can hardly tell the difference. Can you?
Okay, Phil, got to interrupt you one more time because your 2 minutes is up. And Bob, I'm going to move over to you.
Thanks, Bev. As your Conservative candidate, our position has not changed. We do not support mandatory vaccinations and support the right for you to make your own health choices when it comes to vaccines. For those who are unvaccinated, we continue to believe in reasonable measures such as rapid testing to protect everyone, especially the most vulnerable. We also need an internationally recognized travel document for Canadians who wish to travel abroad. Only the federal government can provide that document. It is up to individual foreign governments to establish vaccination rules for travelers, and countries around the world are now requiring proof of vaccination to enter their countries. This is simply about supporting Canadians who want to travel to those countries. For those concerned about the vaccine passport plans being put forward by the BC government, I encourage you to contact Premier Horgan and your MLA to discuss these provincial plans. It's unfortunate that once again, Justin Trudeau will try and politicize vaccines and the pandemic for his own personal gain. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Catherine, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Every person in Canada who is eligible to get vaccinated against COVID-19 should do so for their own protection and for the protection of their community members. But it's also your body and your decision about that. I feel Canadians need to be more literate in transmissible disease prevention, and at this time, I don't feel that they are not as knowledgeable as we could be. And I believe that our medical industry and our politicians are on a steep learning curve. We are becoming polarized on the topic, vaxxer versus anti-vaxxer, moving the issue into a human rights debate. Creating mandatory legislation for vaccinations did not necessarily work as well as we think it will. Individuals with medical conditions, religions, cultural beliefs, those that are live rurally and remotely will require flexibility. Canadians must become more literate in transmissible diseases, and our federal government needs to provide as much information as possible so that everyone understands how they make their choice. The mandatory passport, as it stands, is leaving more people polarized, businesses potentially out of business, having to police people coming into their business or not police. We have 10,000 businesses already lining up in British Columbia stating that they will not police mandatory vaccinations. They will not police passport processes, and we have to honor that. The more we mandatorize any piece of legislation, the more people that fall between the cracks, the more polarized issues become, the more tensions rise, and the more unpredictable our own communities become. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. David?
Thanks, Bev. Some good comments, and I agree with a lot of what Bob said and a lot of what Catherine just said. Our logo has freedom written right in the logo. It is your body. It is your choice. I think it was a huge failure of government to roll this vaccine program out and explain to the public exactly what the benefits and efficacy and how it was made, the science behind it, all of those things. Had that been explained properly, we may have had a much better turnout or a result. But at the same time, even though I am vaccinated and I am pro-vaccine, it is still a choice. And I do believe that it is polarizing the community. I also agree with what Catherine stated in regards to our small businesses and how to enforce that and how to police that becomes very difficult. I think to my daughter at her restaurant where she's managing and how she's going to interact with people when they're not happy about having to show anything or they don't want to or whatever. How are we going to do that and how are we going to protect them? As far as small business goes, that is something that really needs the support of government in incentives, in hiring, in all kinds of things that we can. There's a lot of things that we can do. It's 2 minutes is not enough to get into it, but I'd be happy to take it up afterward, especially with you in Fort Nelson either later today or tomorrow. There's a lot there that we need to do to support our small businesses. Thank you.
Okay, and Ryan.
I addressed this pretty thoroughly in my introduction there, but essentially the People's Party of Canada believes very strongly that this is a very unfortunate abuse of power from federal and provincial governments, and that Trudeau has handled this very irresponsibly, and even as Bob said, using it for his own personal gain. It's been enjoyable to listen because I feel like I've appreciated a lot of what many of the candidates have said regarding the polarization and the concerns for the small businesses. These small businesses are not bluffing. They will refuse, and the government will have to shut down their businesses if we carry on down this track. And I just am deeply concerned that the government thinks if we just keep pushing, they'll give in, they'll cave, we'll have everybody vaccinated. It's not going to go like that up here. And but what the People's Party of Canada is committed to doing is promoting a rational and scientifically based approach to the pandemic that focuses on protection of the most vulnerable, guarantees the freedom of Canadians to make decisions based on informed consent, and rejects coercion and discrimination. We will fire the Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, Theresa Tam, and replace her with someone who will work with provincial agencies to implement a rational approach to the pandemic instead of following the recommendations of the World Health Organization. We will repeal vaccine mandates and regular testing for federal civil servants and workers in federally regulated industries. We will repeal vaccine passport for travelers, oppose vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, and other authoritarian measures imposed by provincial governments, and support individuals and groups that challenge such measures in court. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Ryan. So I do have a question here that was sent in regarding the carbon tax. In rural communities such as ours, carbon tax hits us particularly hard. We don't have other options. We have businesses, particularly in the tourism industry, that are off the grid. They don't have the option of hydro or other clean energies. So what is your position on the carbon tax for rural and remote communities, particularly northern ones where no public transport? We don't have other options up here. So if you could, we'll let maybe Bob go first this time.
Sure. We have a serious plan to combat climate change that allows us to meet our targets and reduce emissions by 2030, all while repealing Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. Instead of sending your money to Ottawa, the low carbon savings account will help Canadians make greener lifestyle choices while allowing them to decide what works best for them and their family. LCSAs will incentivize Canadians to make greener lifestyle choices that reduce their emissions while also allowing them to decide what works best for them and their family. Not one penny of the price of hydrocarbon fuels for Canadians and small businesses will go to government. The LCSA program will be completely transparent and engage Canadians in the process of building a lower carbon future with the ability to purchase items like locally grown fruits and vegetables, meats and dairy products, transit passes, bicycles, or home energy efficiency improvement projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Catherine?
Thank you. A carbon tax on our Green Party platform would be charged on things that emit carbon dioxide, like gasoline, natural gas, and coal. Pricing these emissions creates an incentive to reduce them. The tax would be proportional to the amount of carbon dioxide emitted, since the CO2 emissions from coal are much greater than the gasoline or natural gas. Coal would face a much higher carbon tax. Virtually every good and service in Canada involves some emissions of greenhouse gases, from the transportation of an item to the electricity used to make it, to the natural gas used to heat the factory. Of course, fossil fuels themselves involve the greatest emissions, as does electricity produced by burning them. The effect of a carbon tax is to incorporate a price for greenhouse gas emissions in every good and service in Canada. So goods and services that cause very high emissions would become relatively more expensive. This would create an incentive for everyone to make economic choices that contribute to less global warming. The carbon tax would offset by reductions in other taxes. The net impact would generally depend on your carbon emissions. There would also be tax breaks for low incomes. And in the Fort Nelson, there are opportunities for many green ventures. And this is something that I know many individuals have been exploring. And that is about using the geothermal heat that exists under the Fort Nelson area and in that vast region. And so these are things that must be explored further. Thank you.
We'll go with David.
Thank you, Bev. This is a topic that is very near and dear to me. Carbon tax. The Maverick Party is vehemently opposed to the carbon tax, the carbon levy. And what you just heard from Bob is exactly why I'm sitting in this chair. That is political doublespeak, to give money to the government and then have them issue funding for a bicycle or whatever, because they know how to spend your money better than you do. The carbon tax will hurt Canadians, and it will hurt hard. It already is showing its ugly head right now. We want to repeal the carbon tax in its entirety and focus on Canada leading the way in making effective greenhouse gas emissions globally by producing the most environmentally sound and the number one country in the world in terms of extraction of resources is Canada. We need to get more Canada into major polluters like China and India and Europe, all over the world. We can do that. This is a very frustrating thing for me to hear. Yeah, very, very opposed to a carbon tax in any form, carbon levy, whatever. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Phil?
Hello. I, like Dave, am here for exactly the same reason. It is very unfortunate that we're here wasting time on this issue. And the reason I say this is Canada is not a world emitter. Canada's emissions are a blip on the scale of world emissions. Other countries are huge contributors to emissions. So why all this focus on Canada? It's ridiculous. Now the Conservatives, they want to treat you like children. They want to say, we know how to spend your money better than you. We will help you make responsible environmental choices. I'm sorry, I am not a retarded child. I just am not. Leave my money in my wallet and let the free market decide what green products are best for consumers. That's the best way. Whenever government touches anything, it doesn't go well. King Midas was a guy who touched things and they turned to gold. The government touches things, the gold disappears, and you are left with fecal matter. And this is exactly what will happen with this kind of plan. I am sorry, but the Conservatives promised they would not support a carbon tax, and now they are. This is disgusting, and it's a knife in the back of every Canadian, every Northern British Columbian in particular. my natural gas bill, I pay more carbon tax than I pay for the actual gas. This is ridiculous. Natural gas is clean energy. Emissions. You want to monitor emissions? Monitor emissions from people who are pro-carbon tax, because they're polluting the political environment with their fraud. As I said, I can prove this is a fraud. It is easy to prove, and if you give me the time, I will do it. Unfortunately, I was interrupted while doing so.
Thanks, Phil. We'll move on to Ryan.
Thanks, Bev. Certainly on the issue of carbon tax, the People's Party of Canada does not support that whatsoever. And it's certainly ridiculous in areas like this where I too have to heat my home with fossil fuels. And it's pretty challenging and extremely expensive to come up with alternative solutions. I personally live off of solar entirely. I'm not even on the grid because BC Hydro has ridiculous costs for power poles. So anyways, I do believe in being responsible and making responsible decisions that are that do not unnecessarily harm our economy. And I believe that our natural gas is a really valuable and necessary part of our way of life. And to tax us for using that up here is absurd. And so I would agree with many of the statements made by Phil and by Dave as well. And Phil, I appreciate your passion. I would definitely caution you on some of your choice of words.
Did I swear?
Thanks,
No.
Ryan. We're going to move on to Amir.
Thank you so much. So for us to get to the net zero by 2050, we need to have a way to move people towards a more greener choice. That's my position. I don't want to take too much of the time for this, but I want to have, if that's possible by the moderators, I want to give my time to Phil to actually explain his position on this, because he said that he can actually prove that this is a fraud. So if you can, Phil, explain a little bit more, that would be great.
So Phil, I am going to limit you to 2 minutes though on this, because everybody has had a chance to speak. Because Amir asked you a direct question, we'll allow it, but
Okay.
just caution
please
you.
repeat the question so that I can address it as accurately as possible.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Could you please repeat the question?
No, yeah, sure. So you said that you can prove that the entire thing is a fraud. I just wanted to make sure that I understand, your mindset and the logic that goes and comes to that conclusion.
Sure.
And I'm open to hear various sides on this. Point is, I want to make sure that yes, it's very important that we choose something that is reflective of what we need in the northern BC, but at the same time, we have to think a broader case in our case of Canada, and also internationally as well. Just remember that we just had 700 people dead and a town just burned completely because of the climate change, and we need to have measured actions just to make sure that people reduce their carbon footprint. So go ahead.
Thank you, Amir. Very simply, coal was mined in Tumbler Ridge, Boom Moose and Quintet until that mine was depleted for 32 years. Now coal comes from Brule Mine and Willow Creek Mine in Chetwynd, BC. It is mined, shipped overland by rail to the coast, and shipped from this continent to China, then burned openly in their industry. They do not use clean burn tech in their industry. Okay, one trip with one of those big ships full of coal and then openly burned exceeds the emissions by all of Canada for an entire year. That's just a fact. Now,
Sorry, just
government, sorry, I'm getting to it.
Okay,
Government, please let me speak. Government receives resource revenues from the export of that coal. Anything that is mined or sourced in Canada, the government gets resource revenues from that. And they're fully aware of this. To my understanding, they've gotten over $5 billion from that extraction and export of coal from Canada. So these very same people who are pushing the carbon tax are the people who tell all of us that we have too big of a carbon footprint. I ask you, what is the carbon footprint of mining that coal, shipping that coal overland, and then shipping it by freight, and then open burning it in China? So then we have this airy-fairy idea that we will replace that with natural gas or LPG, LNG, whatever. Isn't happening. It just isn't happening. Now, I'm not against the export of coal. I am against being lied to that these people care about the environment. They do not. If they did, they would acknowledge these facts and they would speak openly about it, but they suppress these facts. Every night, my house shakes, being rumbled. 150 yards away is a rail line with hundreds of cars full of coal headed for China. Okay, so what is the carbon footprint of that? I assure you, it exceeds all Canadians by a very large margin. So if you really care about the environment, don't tell me that I have a big carbon footprint. Don't tell me I have to pay a tax. Please get your knee off of my neck, and your knee is the carbon tax. It is a fraud, and anybody who supports carbon tax is lying to you.
Can I
It's
Thank you.
true.
Yes, no, okay, Phil, I have to stop you there. You're well over 2 minutes. And
No, let's just get started.
yeah, I know you, I believe you. And this, we can't have a debate between candidates. This is an opportunity for the public. So
I just wanted to answer some things that some of the other people have said about what I said, and I just want to correct the record. What's being said is that the money will go to government. It won't be for the LCSA. It's going to be not one penny will ever go to government to redistribute, as been said by one of the candidates on the call today. It's going to be in personally managed accounts by individuals to be used in ways they wish to use it. So it's completely different than a tax, because the tax goes to government and you don't see it come back. This money will never go to government in the first place. So just to correct the record. Thank you.
okay. Thank you, Bob. And I am going to also comment that if the candidates could please not engage in debate in the chat, because that makes it a little bit more difficult to manage this. So we have another question. How would you support our forestry sector? Specifically, will you continue to support old growth logging and the use of damaging practices like glyphosate spraying? Do you recognize these practices as directly affecting climate change in our region? Oh, sorry. If we could start with David.
Thank you. It's a great question. Supporting the forestry sector is incredibly important. Old growth logging and damaging practices, I have a little bit of an issue with that. Old growth logging, we really need to respect our environment and make sure that we manage things appropriately. But we are number one in the world in forestry, in stewardship, and do have sustainable mining practices, or forestry practices, I should say. About 10% of the world's forestries are monitored in this fashion, the way we do in Canada, and we are head and shoulders above even second place by about 40%. There are a lot of facts that go along with this statement, and it's easily to look it up. You can look it up on Canada Action under forestry and see what the facts are. They have a very good site that'll lead you to a lot of that stuff. Climate change is, again, one of the most damaging and most significant issues of our time. We're seeing it in fires. We're seeing it all over the place. We're not going to get away with it unless we have a global view of that situation, and focusing on major emitters and major polluters is much better. When Canada is already number one in the world in many of these aspects, I think we need to look outward and utilize that in terms of generating revenue and funding that would, again, alternate or give us funding for practices to advocate for alternative energies and those kind of things, doing research and development and leading the world. So both parts of that question were excellent. As far as the spraying goes, some spraying is needed. I'm not in that science in that department. I would have to rely on the experts for that and what their considerations are.
Okay,
Thanks for the
Dave.
question.
Thanks, Dave. Let's go to Phil.
Hello. I have had a lot of experience in the wood and lumber industry. I've worked in planer mills, sawmills. I have worked in construction with lumber, building houses. I have worked on firefighting crews. I have worked on spacing crews. I have been in the bush hunting and harvesting moose to feed my family. I have seen what glyphosate does to the wildlife. You will not find a moose, a deer, an elk, or a bear in any area that has been sprayed with glyphosate. That stuff leaches right into the water table, and there must be safer alternatives. There has to be. If the animals don't like it, it isn't good for people. And I would personally be afraid to consume an animal that has been feeding in that area. But you don't see that happening. They avoid areas that have been sprayed. If you're out hunting, you will not find game in those areas. So there's been some confusion, I think, considering climate change and forest fires. They're not necessarily as directly related as people would have you believe. In fact, we've had a devastating spruce beetle infestation in this region, which has massive forests of standing tinder boxes that will go off at a spark. One of our world famous parks to the east of Prince George is Banff and Jasper. You would not believe how many dead standing trees are there. Now, people will say, oh, it's because of climate change. In fact, wildfires are a fact of life every single year. And if you go on the Forestry website, you will find that forest fires, the rate has actually decreased in the last few years, which is remarkable considering how much dry tinder is standing out there. All that dead tinder standing out there, and the government has done very little to deal with that situation. So you tell me, do you really want to sit there and spin and say, oh yeah, this is because of climate change? It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with a forest half as big as this entire continent standing dead, dry, waiting to go with a spark. This is our problem, and it has not been dealt with. And so I would say we need to start looking at the facts, becoming educated, and speaking the truth to these issues. Climate change, there's no climate emergency. And if giving money to government could fix climate change, how on earth did we get into this problem in the first place? Someone please answer me that.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Catherine, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. Just be 1 second. I would just like to speak to, it's a challenge to manage Canada as an island. We have a pandemic that reaches beyond our borders. We have climate change that reaches beyond our borders. And we have trees that we see as the lungs of our earth that provide us with the best fresh air that we could breathe. And without them, we would not survive. And I was just noting yesterday, as the leaves are falling, that in this area where we live in our region, we don't get that 6 months of the year because half the year the leaves are gone. BC's majestic old growth forest is in crisis. Every hour, 2 football fields of ancient forests, including 800-year-old trees, are logged. As a climate crisis, insect infestations and forest fire intensify, one of our best defenses against them, old growth trees, are being logged to oblivion. 75% have been logged and only 8% is protected. And what's worse is they're being exported as raw logs. So we're reaping minimal benefits for the loss of these precious trees and resources. One of the best carbon sinks on Earth, these trees hold significant value to Indigenous people, are essential for salmon and watershed health. They draw tourism from around the world and hold as much water as they're a line of defense against our increasing forest fires. Though forestry is typically a provincial jurisdiction, This is a federal issue. It's a threat to our national efforts to stop the climate crisis. The federal government needs to step in, as it has with the carbon pricing. Greens are the only party standing up for the last old growth trees. And we definitely need to stop the glyphosate spraying. I've done work with Environment Canada, as I'd mentioned, in Blueberry River, but I've also done work with Health Canada and working with a chemist in the Vanderhoof bioregion, and interviewed many First Nations individuals who've seen dead birds, woodpeckers, changes in vital organs as they go out and hunting after glyphosate spraying. We have to recognize that this is not an investment that we need to continue on. Glyphosate spraying is devastating our forest sector, our lives, our livelihoods, our salmon, our watershed. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bev, and thanks for the question. Yeah, we've seen in the ancient forest of McBride, protecting some of the old growth is key. There are some trees in some cases are 1,000 years old, and it's good to see them protected in that way. As for glyphosate, I'm the BC member, or was the BC member on the Natural Reserves Committee. We were just doing a forestry economic recovery study in that committee, and glyphosate came up, and just while we were digging in to see if that's what practices are being done provincially, an election happened. So very concerned that that somehow would get into the water table or affect anybody's health. So it's something that we're digging into, but again, we're doing that. That said, forestry is huge for our province and for Fort Nelson especially. We've seen the potential that's up there, and really the timber basket now has moved up into the northern part of the province and there to be harvested responsibly. And I know some business owners are wanting to do that. Brian Fair being one of them, and starting with a pellet mill and a lumber mill following. That's what his discussion has been. So although we do need to do some protecting in some ways and concerned about glyphosate, forestry is a big industry in the province and a big part of what Fort Nelson's potential was and is going to be, and actually is. So we want to support you in Fort Nelson to make that a reality. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Ryan?
Thanks, Bev, and thank you, Courtney, for the question. I think it is a real significant question for our region. I totally agree with many of the other candidates on the glyphosate issue. That's irresponsible government reactionary response, and I think we've seen a lot of that. But anyways, regarding the old growth, I think there's a lot of it that is worth protecting. It is beautiful to see old trees. There's a lot of issues with old growth areas that are, as Phil was saying, are highly flammable. And we want to, I think it's responsible to log those and remove the hazards that we're seeing. That obviously we're having massive forest fire issues in the southern part of the province. And I think our efforts to try to protect environment sometimes overlook practical solutions to serious problems. So I think if we're going to see a reduction in the amount of forest fires we're having, we're going to need to invest in the forestry sector, seeing them have more opportunity to log. I know some people are frustrated about the idea of logging certain areas, but if it presents a significant hazard, I think it's wise to actually just get rid of these standing dead trees. In fact, the pine beetle issue was known 10 years, was a very well-known issue before we ever even addressed the issue. And I think we need to start tackling things before they become significant problems.
Thanks, Ryan. Amir?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and we need to bring people together when it comes to bringing more solutions onto the table. Liberal platform will have $50 million on BC Old Growth Nature Fund, and we need to make partners with other players in this keeping this environment much safer. And with the spray of glyphosate, I'm completely in agreement with pretty much everybody on the board that this there's so much mixed record on this, and it's non-selective. It's, you know, it brings more harm that you can actually see it with people having irritation and diarrhea, vomiting, and stuff. So for sure, I'm against that. Yeah.
Thanks, Amir. I'm going to direct the next question at Bob. Can you shed light on why Bill C-15 didn't pass at the federal level, but did at the provincial level?
It actually did pass at the federal level as well. We had opposed it at third reading, but then it went on to pass in Parliament, and then it went on to pass in the Senate. So it has passed in the House provincially and the House in federally.
Okay, thank you. Okay, connectivity. We've all seen, even just in this meeting, some issues around connectivity. The Fort Nelson Chamber has a policy in front of both the Canadian Chamber and the BC Chamber on connectivity as an essential service, particularly in the north and rural and remote Canada. We need affordable, equitable, good quality bandwidth. So if I could maybe have you comment on your thoughts along those lines, and we'll start with David this time.
Thank you, Bev. This is something that's near and dear to me and is evident as we sit right here. I cannot work from my home due to poor bandwidth and bad quality. I would have glitched out for sure. This is something that needs some very serious investment and oversight from a federal level. That also includes the 5G network and Huawei. There has been some tremendous recommendations there from major entities within government recommending not to deal with them for security issues and for other issues. So those have to be considered as well. But this is a sector that is directly impacting the North. And as we progress into the age where we can work from remote areas or whatever, it becomes more and more prevalent to give our voices in the North and our ability to work from home or work from wherever we are. This is a crucial issue, especially for our region here in northeastern BC. Great question, and thank you.
Thank you. Phil, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I understand that the local TELUS is putting in 5G in this area. And as far as I know, connectivity is at least expanding in speed and power in this region. And I've seen them burying cables all over the North. I'm not a techie. I have lots of experience in the forest industry and with wood, dangerous snag falling, firefighting. As an artist, many things, but I am not a techie. I actually have to admit that I'm quite glad that this ancient computer I'm using doesn't burst into flames at any time, because it's about 10 years old, which is 1,000,000 years old in the computer world. So I really can't comment on that too much, but I'm not going to pretend I know something about something I just don't. So I will just pass that on to the next candidate who may be more knowledgeable. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Amir.
Sorry, would you please repeat the question, because I was writing all the questions and I didn't get the chance to write this one.
It's a question on connectivity in rural and remote Canada. So the chamber has policies in front of government right now regarding the need for connectivity as an essential service. It's super important to our communities.
Absolutely.
And just your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So as you correctly mentioned, it's essential. So when it's essential, it must be there with a reasonable quality that you can rely on. I believe that, and I invite among all of us, probably Bob has the highest chance to get elected or re-elected at this point. So I want everybody on the as you know, as our potential candidates, and also Bob as well, to see whether you guys are committed to force the government to make internet for all as a law, as a part of the human rights acts that we have in Canada, to make sure that the government is pushed to its limits to provide internet access as much as they can. And if they don't, people in rural areas here can actually sue the government so that they can provide that. At some point, we just have to do this. We have to provide this for our community. That's my position on this.
Thank you. Ryan.
Thanks, Bev. This question, I think we see some issue of prioritization, and I respect that the community has a little connectivity, and I think the fact that your Chamber of Commerce is presenting to the government this is a concern. I think the government needs to recognize that and honor that. And if a government doesn't, it's out of order. We are, as government officials, they are called civil servants, and it have become more like civil slave masters and forced, as Amir was saying, they should force. And there's this a bit of a twist there. Anyways, on regards to connectivity, I think it is a priority that we need to deal with. I think we need to make sure that there are other issues that are much larger, like clean water for some of the Aboriginal communities. I cannot believe the shame of our country that we have not actually dealt with that. I mean, I could go out with 10 people if the government would permit and come up with clean water for many of these. It's not that complicated. I don't know why our government and our wonderful Prime Minister there, we find out the horrendous things that have happened in many of the Aboriginal communities in the past, and his response is, hey, we're going to create a new statutory holiday. It's unbelievable. Anyways, I do respect the need for connectivity, and I think that is an important issue, and that I appreciate that your Chamber of Commerce is fending for you guys. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Catherine, and then Bob.
Yeah, coming, just one sec.
Yep.
I would just like to share that rural Canada, rural Canada, just like our vulnerable community members in urban centers, often fall through the service cracks because the voices are so few. The internet has become the primary public sphere in which information is disseminated and accessed in Canada. Just like electrification and telephones in early eras, internet access has become an essential part of full participation in Canadian society and a vital part of economic development. With broadband penetration is said to have reached 95% of Canadians. 16% of rural Canadian households still lack high-speed connection, and the quality and speed of many of those that nominally still have one lags far behind the standard of many of our competitors. And so this is what we're hearing. Through the federal government, currently subsidized 50% of the cost of new broadband infrastructure in rural areas currently not serviced by broadband through its Broadband Canada. Connecting Rural Canadians program, the private sector is still reluctant to make the required investment to provide services in many rural areas. Canada has the technology to launch communication satellites similar to those put up by Japan that could provide true high-speed internet access to every household into every country. Sorry, in every country, as in Japan. And so the Green Party stands that we would make sure that these services are prioritized. It is the only way as we move forward into the future to collaborate and bring our communities closer so that everybody is connected. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, it's our plan to have connectivity across the north by 2025. I've been personally involved in getting high-speed access to communities in the riding, and we're seeing that being built as we speak. If you drive along Pine Pass and various parts of the riding, you'll see those orange pipes that are getting put in the ground. So that's there. Rogers didn't tell us. Again, been pushing to provide access to places like Mackenzie, Powder King, Fort Nelson, and all the rest. Now it hasn't been accomplished yet, and it needs to go faster, and that's our point. I think what's been said about Huawei, the Huawei equipment concern, is that we have said we've been very clear that it shouldn't be used for the purposes of national security. I've seen the potential of all our information getting siphoned by China, and we have a lot of technical expertise in Canada. And we will see absolutely every piece of it if some of that infrastructure is implemented. Whether it's rural communities, Indigenous communities, connectivity is no longer an option. It's part of how we communicate with each other and how we converse in our new public square here. So we think it needs to be a priority, and we will make it so.